Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Western Spirit. Today, we have a very special guest, someone who I've known since he was the Israeli ambassador to the U.S., and then after that, when he was in the Israeli Knesset and in the government, in the Israeli government. And so today we have with us Dr. Michael Oren. He's, like we said, the former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., and he's someone who's he's a historian and someone who I think really has a pulse about what's happening in now and in a historical context. So, Dr. Oren, it's very good to be with you today.
Great to be with you, Ariel. Thank you for hosting me.
So, for sure. So, I wanted to just ask you, just before we start today, Sky News in Arabic reported that Iran was holding off or delaying its attack that it was planning on Israel, and the wording of the report was that it was in order to negotiate with the new Trump administration. What can we read to that? Why are they suddenly, maybe because before the elections in America, they were very, we're attacking Israel for sure. And now they're backtracking. What's happening?
First of all, no surprise. I almost half expected that response from Tehran. And it's a product of several factors. One is that basically after Israel's counterstrikes against Iran, Iran has no aerial defenses. It's vulnerable. It's completely vulnerable. And Israel can strike Iran virtually at will. Another factor was the decision by the Biden administration to move 6 B-52 strategic bombers to the Middle East. It's the first time the strategic bombers have been deployed in the Middle East, American strategic bombers. Israel does not have strategic bombers. We have very nice fighter planes. We have F-15s and 16s and F-35s, which have relatively short ranges and carry small payloads. A B-52 can fly around the world. It flies at 50,000 feet. Nothing Iran has in its arsenal can touch it. And it drops a bomb of 30,000 pounds, which can penetrate virtually any bunker, any facility, including a nuclear facility such as Fordo. And so the Iranians understood that there was also a limit to President Biden's patience. So they were vulnerable and they were running out of time. And now they're facing Donald Trump. Now, there was a danger, and there still is a danger, that Iran could use the next 2 months as an opportunity, and their last opportunity, to break out and create a nuclear weapon. Because they know after January 20th, in the inauguration of President Trump, they will not have that opportunity. But they're already signaling their willingness to negotiate, which is a kind of a crying uncle now, isn't it? Unless they're pulling wool over everyone's eyes, which you can't rule out. Okay, we know we're in the Middle East. But they're afraid of Donald Trump. They've always been afraid of Donald Trump. As a matter of fact, there's an interesting story. On October 5th, 2023, I was giving a lecture in Dallas, and I told my audience, to their chagrin, that Israel would soon be going to war. And I gave many reasons why. One of them was the peace treaty that was impending between Israel and Saudi Arabia, when Saudi Arabia was going to get nuclear power from the United States. And I said, anybody who thinks that the Iranians are going to sit quietly while Saudi Arabia gets nuclear power, they're kidding themselves. And it had to do with the great divisions within Israeli society, the divisions within American society. And then finally, I said, remember, this is over a year ago, that the Iranians were looking at the polls. They see that Donald Trump is in the lead, and they're afraid. And they understand that this is their last opportunity to really have a military option. Well, that opportunity is now running out, and running out very fast. And back in October 23, you say Iran could start a war. And I think it's left to be proven definitively that Iran was behind the events of October 7th, but there's certainly an Iranian involvement. And now the Iranians are scared, as, by the way, they should be, because Donald Trump has now made these senior appointments to his administration, almost to the man, are people who are signally supportive of hardline against Iran, including all options on the table and a military option. Keep in mind that President Biden had taken the military option off the table. It's now back on.
Do you think, just as a general thing, one of the things that Trump is unconventional in the way that he approaches diplomacy? So even former Republican presidents, they approach diplomacy usually in some sort of very understandable, and we could understand the reasoning behind what they were saying, what they were doing. There's a pattern about the way they went around doing things. With Trump, he presents himself in a way which is very unconventional. Does that
The only pattern is the absence of a pattern, Ariel.
Exactly.
Right.
So does that maybe just explain to us in terms of a student of diplomacy and historical terms? Were there other people in the that we could maybe look back and say Trump is using those types of tactics, or is it totally new what we're seeing with him?
I think of someone who was very unpredictable. Napoleon was unpredictable. All the examples I'm going to give you are going to be negative examples, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately. I don't know if Churchill was predictable or not, or a Roosevelt was predictable or not.
Hmm.
But Trump is extreme. The president Trump is very, very different. He is. And because he is unpredictable, um, predictability in the Middle East is a liability.
Yeah.
I wrote a book called Israel 2048. It's probably on my bookshelf behind there. It's about the steps that Israel has to make on our 100th birthday, 2048, so to ensure another 100 years of prosperity and security. And there's a section on defense that I wrote maybe 2 years before the war. And I said one of our biggest liabilities that we, Israel, has become predictable. The enemy knows they're going to fire a certain number of rockets back at us. We're going to bomb them from the air, and then we're going to reach a ceasefire and pay them off more. Okay, that was pretty much the routine with Hezbollah and with Hamas. Um, predictability in our area is the danger, and Trump doesn't have that danger. And I hope that we don't anymore. I think that since the tide have turned in the current war, with assassinating Ismail Haniyeh, assassinating the heads of Hezbollah, the walkie-talkie pager operation for which we don't take credit, that was being very unpredictable. And you notice that the minute we stopped being predictable, we started winning.
Let's take a moment to thank our sponsor, Globius, the Amazon strategy experts. Are you ready to launch or scale your brand on Amazon? If so, you want to pay close attention. With their expertise, Globius has propelled over 75 brands to top seller status across major markets like the US, Europe, and Asia, with some of them reaching seven-figure revenues. As part of the exclusive Amazon service provider network, Globius offers a significant competitive edge. They provide tailored strategies from store setup to daily management and strategic scaling, ensuring your brand excels. Globius's services features direct access to Amazon's internal insights and trends thanks to their Amazon account manager. Ready to outpace your competitors? Click the QR code on your screen or the link in the description for a free consultation and an exclusive Amazon Market Trends report. Elevate your brand with Globius, backed by solid data and extensive e-commerce experience. There is no need to worry about e-commerce operations anymore. Let Globius lead your way to success. Now let's return to our show. Yeah. Also, Michael, Dr. Oren, one thing that I wanted to ask you about was we are
Yes.
in the last months of a leaving administration of a lame duck president, and what's interesting about it is that in the Barack Obama's last months after when he knew he was going to leave, the U.S. abstained on a resolution at the UN that Israel was not happy with that abstaining. Could you maybe just take us back to what happened there? And should we be worried that something like that might happen now?
Okay, well, that we're talking about Resolution 2334 of December of 2000 was actually 2019, right? 2016.
16.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's strange. Just a story. I was in the government at the time, and I warned the prime minister in September. He was about to sign on the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding with President Obama, that would have given us and did give us ultimately $4 billion a year in aid for 10 years. And I'm not a big proponent of aid. I have lots of criticism of aid, but I don't think that's our subject here. But and I was probably the only member of that government who was openly opposed to that MOU. But I said to Prime Minister Netanyahu, you signed this in September, and you're going to see in December, President Obama is going to condemn us on the Security Council on the settlements. So again, I'm not a prophet. I'm not prescient, but there was, the writing was on the wall. Obama he gave us an MOU, but he had an MO. He had a modus operandi, which was he would give us money and then he condemn us. He gave us money for Iron Dome and he condemned us. Right, always. And it was so he was very predictable. So I knew if we accepted that MOU, we were going to get condemned in the Security Council. Behind that resolution. And by the way, there were supposed to have been two resolutions. The second one was actually defeated by the Russians. And Secretary of State John Kerry denied to high heaven that the United States was promoting these resolutions, but of course we knew they were, and lobbying other delegations to vote in favor of them. And, by abstaining, they simply sat back and let it pass. I think it was built up resentment over Netanyahu. Remember the speech to the joint session of Congress against the Iran nuclear deal that was given behind behind the president's back. A lot of built up resentment over the years, going back, to the famed lecture in the Oval Office. I was there at that so-called lecture, and this was Obama's, I think, rather childish way of getting back.
Do you think that there's a danger that this is something that could happen now, something like that?
Yes, I do. I think President Biden is not President Obama. I mean, President Obama never would have gotten off an airplane in the state of Israel and declared to the entire world that he is a Zionist. Right? And President Biden has done this several times, and it's off script, and he's completely sincere about it. He loves this country. He loves the Jewish people. He has been close to Jews all of his life. He has, as the vice president, I know he had the best Rosh Hashanah parties in Washington. And that's that part that remembers the 6-Day War, that remembers the 73 War, that remembers Golda Meir. That wasn't Barack Obama. But on the other hand, there's a lot of resentments here. And resentments at Netanyahu, particularly, and over the last year especially. And I wouldn't rule out some type of vengeful response in the Security Council if Israel would agree, for example, to augment the rate of humanitarian aid entering Gaza, or to agree to certain conditions for a Lebanese ceasefire.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I saw you wrote on Twitter a few weeks ago was when it came out that there was this letter with the Secretary of State and the Defense Secretary, basically threatening Israel that if they didn't put in more aid to northern Gaza, that the U.S. would, I think we could say, just do a blockade of weapons shipments to Israel. And you wrote a very, I think, interesting tweet about that. But maybe just give us what you said and why it's so, even just the actual threat, even if they don't go through with it, why it's so dangerous.
Well, I had my initial tweet. I calmed down a lot. I toned it immediately. Initially, I was outraged, but in that tweet, I was really disappointed. Remember, we're in the middle of a presidential race, and no matter what you say, it gets if I said too harsh, it'd be interpreted as pro-Trump, anti-Biden, the whole thing. But the bottom line was this: it's a betrayal. It's a betrayal to use that leverage at a country that is fighting for a war of our survival, and we're fighting for a war of survival. It's not only a bad message for Israel, I said. It is a bad message for America's allies in the world. Can you trust the United States as an ally? And I said that ultimately this decision, this threat, is a boomerang. It's going to impact American security because people will not want to stand by the United States if the United States is not going to stand by them.
Right. And also, in terms of threatening Israel, there were in the past, historically speaking, different presidents that threatened and stuff like this.
Certainly. Ronald Reagan withheld the supply of F-15 jets after we eliminated the Iraqi nuclear reactor in 1981, for example. There have been several times in our history with the United States presidents.
But in the middle of a war like this, where, like you said, never.
On the contrary, during 1973, President Nixon ordered a SkyTrain of thousands and thousands and thousands of tons of military equipment shipped to Israel.
Yeah. So this is unprecedented. And I know that in the last few days, just to update, you probably know better than I do, but we've been hearing that Israel is opened Kisufim and all these other places to streamline tons of new trucks going in every second, and the current Secretary of State Blinken said, okay, this means that we can give the weapons because Israel is complying by what we asked them to do on the humanitarian aid. Do you think that, I guess my question is, that does Israel need America to force it, quote unquote, to give the aid? Because it seems that Israel is not fighting the Gazan civilians. It's obvious to anyone with half a brain.
And our army disagrees with the American estimate. Colgott the coordinator of policy in the territory, says that there is no famine. In fact, the caloric intake of the average Gazan is higher now than it was before the war. That's what they say. The problem is not
Right.
necessarily also the is not necessarily the giving of aid; it's the distribution of aid. And we know that the distribution, 40% of this aid goes into the coffers of Hamas. They resell it at an inflated price. So you're actually, or the end, and Israelis will say, hey, did the United States give civilian aid to Germany during World War II, or the Japanese during World War II? It's what can I say? It is sui generis.
Right. Also, as a diplomat, Michael, I just want to ask you one thing that as you're speaking, I think, why is there no one on the international stage, as someone who worked in diplomacy and saw it firsthand, that why is the world not going to Egypt and saying, there are these, there were for a long time until we went in on the Rafah border with Egypt, a million plus refugees who are sitting in tents at your border. Why was all the pressure on Israel to put the aid in
with your permission, I can finish answering the first question about the withholding arms. The more recent precedent was done in 2014 by President Obama. President Obama withheld certain types of vital ammunition, helicopter-fired ammunition, with the claim that Israel was killing too many Palestinians. So that's to sound familiar. That event had a big impact on me. That was one of the reasons I opposed the Obama MOU, because I don't like Israel being dependent on an outside power for essential ammunition types. And I think now everyone's come around to my position. I think that Israel in this war and the aftermath of the war will begin to make its own artillery ammunition, will begin to make its own tank ammunition. We won't be pressured anymore. Having said that, even the threat by the United States to cut off ammunition sends an unequivocal message to other countries. We already have partial boycotts by Britain and by Canada. And we had an implicit total boycott from Germany. I went to Germany several weeks ago to lobby in the Bundestag about this, and I think we were successful in getting that implicit boycott and blockade of arms shipments lifted. But still, that message coming from the United States, from our ultimate ally, is a very bad precedent for us. So now your next question had to do with why in the world is there no diplomatic outcry about
Egypt. They have a border with Gaza. Why aren't they streamlining?
Well, there are three reasons. There are three reasons for that. Well, second and third are related, but the first one has to do with the fear that the Egyptian government is very weak. They'll do the power of the weak. If you pressure us too much, we're going to collapse. That one, the Palestinians know that one very well. Yasser Arafat was the champion of that, and the other two has to do with racism and anti-Semitism. What is it? That the world expects less of the Egyptians because, after all, they're Arabs or Egyptians, right? We wouldn't hold them to our standards. And thirdly, it has to do with the fact that Israel's a Jewish state, and Israel is held to a completely different standard. It's not a double standard. It's not even a triple standard. It's a completely different standard, and it's the standard of the Jewish state.
Yes, I agree. We just had John Spencer on our program from West Point, and he said it's the Israel standard. It's like it's not even a triple standard. It's not even a fourple standard. It's the Israel standard.
I didn't know I was quoting him or paraphrasing him. I'm honored, exactly. But it's absolutely true. There's a completely different standard.
Yes, and he gave examples of different urban wars in the past that aren't 100% similar, but pretty similar to what we're doing here in Gaza, on different scales, obviously, but no other army. And he explains in example after example have the types of rules and of engagement and the rules of regulation of the army procedures like Israel has to protect civilian lives on the account of its own safety of its own soldiers. So it's like, and then you see all these genocide stuff, and it's very, very weird, which I guess segues to the next question about how you see, in retrospect, the Biden-Harris administration. Because in the beginning, like you said, President Biden came to Israel. He declared I'm a Zionist. He was with us after everything we went through after October 7th. And at some point, something seemed to change, maybe not in the amount of aid physically, but in the way they spoke about us, in the way they treated us on the world stage, and the criticism that was brought. How do you explain what happened there?
Mixed bag, very mixed bag. On one hand, Joe Biden and his administration went out on a limb for us. They paid a political price for us. They gave us a tremendous amount of aid. For the most part, they kept the ammunition coming. They cast vetoes in the Security Council for the most part. On the other hand, they almost from the very beginning, almost from November 2023, they began to accuse us of what amounted to war crimes, killing too many Palestinians, bombing indiscriminately, which was factually completely untrue. There is no indiscriminate bombing of Gaza. Every artillery shell, every aerial sortie is approved. And, accidents, terrible tragedies happen, but they're approved. Our reaction was over the top. Yeah. This is from the country that invaded two countries that were not involved in 9/11 in any official way. Okay. And killed how many hundreds of thousands of people? Oh, we're over the top. And, that kind of thing. And that had a rebound effect. It was, there's much talk about dog whistles from the Trump camp. This was a dog whistle to the people on campus. To riot against us, to the ICC and the ICJ to condemn us for apartheid and war crimes, and to message to other countries to stop shipping arms to us. And at the end of the day, and this will come out, that they prolonged the war because they convinced Sinwar and other Hamas leaders that time was on their side. All they had to do was dig in, get more Palestinian civilians killed, and eventually there'd be a rupture between the United States and Israel. And better yet, there would be a war with Hezbollah in Israel, and that would get us off the hook. There are deep issues here. One has to do with what I call the democratic worldview, which is a worldview that is not comfortable with military power. You remember von Clausewitz famously said that war is diplomacy by other means. I think that these individuals see war as the failure of diplomacy by all means. They have a deep respect for international institutions like the UN. You never hear a Republican quoting the UN, only Democrats. They're part of it all the time. They believe in engagement. They deeply believe that the way to de-escalate is to de-escalate. Whereas in the Middle East, in order to de-escalate, you have to escalate. Okay?
Yes.
You have to make Iran pay a price. Iran never pays a price. And a fascination / obsession with the Palestinians. Because these are the same individuals who did not seem to experience deep remorse over the abandonment of hundreds of thousands of Afghan women, didn't express any remorse over the massacre of 500,000 Syrians. When it comes to the Palestinians, it tore them apart. Literally, Tony Blinken would talk about not sleeping at night. And did he not sleep at night thinking about the Afghan women? I don't know. It's about Palestinians. And when you're talking about Palestinians, you're talking about Jews. That's the only reason that people care about the Palestinians, because of the Jews. No one cares about the Kurds. No one cares about the Yazidis. But, they care about Palestinians because they're enemies of the Jews. So there was that too. But I've been thinking about another idea, something I'm going to write about soon, Ariel, and that is that in the last administration, there was a fundamental lack of understanding of what warfare is, what it takes to win a war, and how to defend their own civilization. At no point, almost at no point during the course of this last year plus a month, did I get a sense that the administration understood that it is situated in a unique moment in history and a great opportunity / inflection point in history to bring about far, far-reaching strategic changes, not only in the Middle East, but in the world. And all I heard from Washington was remorse / discomfort over Palestinian losses. This notion that too many Palestinians have been killed, which is very strange because it suggests that some number would have been okay, right? Yeah. 7's too much, 5 okay. And fear, all the time fear of being dragged into a regional conflict. That's what I heard again and again and again. Instead of saying, oh my, we're at an extraordinary moment right now. We have a country, a democratic, pro-Western country whose citizenry, not just individuals, citizenry is willing to pick up a rifle, like the Minutemen of yore, and go out and to fight their country for what they believe, for values that are our values, against an enemy which is patently evil and which seeks to destroy everything we hold dear. And instead of saying that to themselves and saying, we're going to back this country with everything we got. Yes, we can feel terrible for the Palestinians who have suffered and died, but they suffered and died because of Hamas, not because of Israel. We never heard that. I never heard that. Do you hear that one time? I never heard that for a second.
No.
And, maybe a certain type of historians, if they're, not all woke historians of the future, look back on this and say, what an incredibly lost opportunity that they had a a moment that was a Lincoln-esque moment or a Rooseveltian moment, a Churchillian moment, and they missed it.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that it has to do with the fact, like you just mentioned, that a lot of the Democrat Party has gone woke in the sense that they look at the world in a sort of oppressed versus oppressor, everything through that lens, and everything is basically, I think, drawn from race politics in the U.S. So the Israelis are Jewish, and Jews are considered white, and their Palestinians are Middle Eastern, which are people of color, and therefore no matter what happens, in some sense, the Israelis must be at blame, and the people, the Palestinians, even the members of Hamas, must be somehow oppressed, and therefore, what?
There's context, as they say. There's context.
Yes, exactly.
There's context. That's the context. Everything's contextualized. You just can't have, evil, good defending itself against evil. All right. You can't have that. That is true. There's another factor, which is I tread delicately here, that with almost no exceptions, really, there is nobody in this administration who's ever had to actually pick up a gun and defend his country. And I suggested to an audience recently that could you imagine Tony Blinken and Jake Sullivan in a uniform with a helmet and a ceramic vest going out to fight? And the audience laughed. I didn't meant it to be funny, but that notion is comic, and that's very dangerous. That's not a good. So people actually don't know what it is to fight in a war. They've never been there.
So I wanted to just ask you also about it seems to me that you're optimistic about the future under this administration, at least for the next 4 years. There's talks about the Saudis and how maybe we can get closer to a deal with them. At the end of the day, I think it's obvious from the Abraham Accords that they do want to come. There is a deep, I think, behind the scenes push for it, but I think with the Biden administration, like you said, there was a sort of apprehension to do anything that might rock the boat, so to speak. So do you think we're going to see within these 4 years dramatic things happening in the Middle East?
I do, but we have to be smart too. With the appointment of what from Israel's perspective is a dream team, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, ambassador to Israel, the ambassador to the United Nations, all that is a dream team. Couldn't get any better. But we also have to be smart and know that Donald Trump he's calling the shots. This dream team is not. They will carry out his instructions. And to go by what, we all want to refer back to his previous administration where he recognized Jerusalem as our capital, recognized Israeli sovereignty of the Golan Heights, pulled out of the Iranian nuclear deal, forged the Abraham Accords, etc. But we also forget that he was against annexation. He was against unlimited settlement building. And he was signed on a deal of the century that was a two-state deal. Now, that may change. It may change. But these were core concepts of Donald Trump. And we should be very careful. We cannot, President Biden said don't all the time. Don't go into Rafah. Don't invade Lebanon. Do not bomb Beirut. And we said, well, sorry, we have to do this. It will not, if President Trump says don't, it'll be a lot harder.
Yes.
To say we're going to do it. A lot harder. And let's keep that in mind. Let's be humble.
So I agree. And also,
and I say just one other thing. One other thing that's very important to say is we must reach out to the Democratic Party.
Yes, that was my next question.
We must. They say you buy the stock when the stock is low. We have really great friends in the Democratic Party. We have Richie Torres, right, for example. And we can't turn our back on them. We can't abandon them. And now is the time to start rebuilding our relationship with this party in the hope that the party also will rebuild this relationship toward us.
Yes. And on that note, I felt in the election, in the campaign, we had the president of the United States. He was at the Democrat National Convention, and he said at one point spontaneously that the protesters outside had a point.
Yeah.
And it was obvious to me, like you said, that it was probably not his actual opinion that they had a point, but that they felt as a party they had to, cater to these extremes, to these people just for the election or just because they were part of their
Michigan,
party.
Michigan,
Their
Michigan.
Yeah,
It's all
their
about Michigan.
coalition.
Yeah.
Exactly. Douglas Murray said they have a two-state solution: Michigan and Pennsylvania.
Right, yeah.
So, but on the other hand, so how do we? Is there a way to get to get to the Democrat Party in terms of like explaining, pulling towards us the people who might be our friends or people in the middle, and because that will cause a rift in the party because you have the squad, you have these people.
Well, I think a lot of it depends on the willingness and ability of this party to do what we call in Hebrew cheshbon nefesh, to do introspection. Where did we go wrong? 80 to 81% of the American public supported Israel in this war. Even 80% of the students on campuses supported Israel in the war. Now, so they're misreading the American public. And I said this throughout the entire campaign, that this is a misreading of American public opinion. But no one else seemed to say that within the Democratic Party. They're still not saying it. I'm reading, I read all American press every day. They're still not saying it.
Why are they not saying? I guess that because it's more comfortable and easy to just say we did everything good and
they list Biden's failures, and one of his principal failures was failure to rein in Israel by denying it arms. That comes up again and again. Comes out again, and that was his failure. And they don't understand that the failure was not giving Israel arms; it was threatening not to give Israel. That was the failure. Because it made. I've been involved in the peace process for many years, and I'll never forget what a Palestinian negotiator once told me in the early Obama years. Obama was the most pro-Palestinian president we'd ever had, and the Palestinians said, "We don't trust him." I said, "Why wouldn't you trust President Obama?" And he says, "Nobody in my world, nobody trusts people who betray their friends, who don't stand by their friends." That there's a reason why some people in the Middle East really favor Trump. Because they see Trump as a loyal person, as a strong friend. And it's human nature, Ariel. There's a great story about Benedict Arnold, who betrayed the American Revolution and went back and moved to Britain. And when he got to Britain, nobody in society would have anything to do with him. Because even though he fought on the British side, no one wanted to befriend a traitor.
Michael, I wanted to just say, as someone who lives in both worlds, Israel and America, and obviously people in Israel, and people, American Jews, a lot. And I think there's a sort of disconnect. How do you look at it when the polls before that they did of Israelis, like Trump won of Israeli Jews like 80%. With the Arab population, it went a bit down, but if it was just the Jews, it was like 70, 80%.
30%.
And then American Jews, even though they voted more for Trump this time, the Democrats candidate still got most of the Jewish vote. So there is a sort of disconnect between American Jews and Jews in Israel.
Yep.
How do you read this? Because we always talk about diaspora and the Jews and the connection. Where is this connection headed?
It's not the majority of Jews care about Israel. They care passionately about Israel, but Israel is not all they care about. They have other issues. In my own family, I know that immigration values, democratic values, abortion, fear of right-wing anti-Semitism more than left-wing anti-Semitism all play a part here. And the Democratic Party has been home to the Jewish people since FDR, since Franklin Delano Roosevelt got 94% of the Jewish vote. It's going to shift. It's going to shift because Jews will increasingly vote according to their actual economic interests, which they've never done before. The old saying in America was that Jews earned like Episcopalians and voted like Puerto Ricans. Right? We're the only ethnic group that voted against our financial interests. That's changing. But it's also because the composition of the American Jewish community is changing. Well, as the liberal communities are contracting, the Orthodox and conservative movements are expanding. And so inevitably there's going to be a shift.
And that's a shift of values too, right? Because like in Israel, we're more of a conservative leaning just in terms of our family values maybe, and also religious values and all this type. Even I was talking with someone, even gay people in Israel, their dream is to have kids.
It's true.
Like
it's not just that.
And in America, what?
Well, the youth of Israel is right wing, and the youth of America, like most youth in the world, is left wing. And our youth is right wing because they've experienced attempts to make peace, and what those attempts at peace brought us. They brought us thousands of rockets. So they're not naive.
Right.
and they're not fragile. We do not have fragile youth. Our youth do not need safe spaces. Our youth need ceramic vests. Okay,
Yes.
right? That's what they need, and you can quote me on that.
Yeah, and we also saw after what I want to ask you, as someone who spent a lot of time on elite college campuses in the West, and it was just reported that in Harvard and in Columbia, the students after Trump won got time off of class and free counseling to cope with the horror, I guess, of some
Classes
candidate
were
they didn't like.
canceled. Yeah. I read all
Yeah.
about it.
What is happening here? How do you
That's
explain it?
fragility. This is an entire generation that has been coddled and fragile, and they're not Israeli youth. As I said, we don't deal with microaggressions here. We deal with actual aggressions. Okay, right? We don't. Our safe space is this room, which is my bomb shelter. That's my safe space.
Yes.
All right, and this whole generation. This is and Columbia's campus. These are the hooligans, the thugs who took over John Jay Hall and then asked for humanitarian food aid. It's very funny, but that is entitlement at an extraordinary, an unparalleled level. It's different, and you ask yourself again: is this a generation that's capable of defending itself, defending the civilization that made it?
Right.
And that gave them the rights to protest. And it's a serious question. And so when I mentioned
what's the answer? What is the answer to that?
I think it's going to swing back. And there was another article this week that's saying that Columbia actually may go bankrupt. And I read this with a bittersweet response because I am a graduate of Columbia. I loved Columbia. Some of the finest years of my life were spent there. I had exquisite education there, but it's become, for in many large part, a cesspool of self-hating, coddled kids. And they're self-hating and self-loving. They love themselves but hate their civilization and hate their society. Right. They even hate the university that made them. And the Trump administration is allowed to cut off all federal funding for many projects, for research, as well as for foreign students. And that's the real thing, because the foreign students now make up a huge part of the income of these universities. And I can't say I shed a tear. I cannot say. And
we also know
it's not the university I attended.
Right.
Not the university
and Michael,
that contributed so much to making me who I am. And I made Aliyah with my whole chevra, my whole gang from Columbia, who went on to do very interesting things in this country and make serious contributions. So it was because of that education we got, great education, but it's gone. We had no politics in the classroom whatsoever.
And you studied a field that you can easily put in politics into the classroom, right?
It was not easy. It began. I actually did graduate work at Princeton. By the time I got to graduate school, politics were in the classroom.
Also, one thing that we have to mention is that there is all these research coming out that a lot of these campuses are getting money to fund a lot of these programs from Qatar and other countries that have an interest in stoking self-hatred in the West and in stoking anti-Semitism in the West. And it's something that I hope the Trump administration looks at in terms of you're getting money from people who hate yourself.
I think generally Qatar should be designated a terror-sponsoring state and should be isolated in the world.
Yeah. Well, Hamas leaders live there, and it's like, how do we accept this?
It's not just that. It's the role they play. And enough of that game.
Yeah. Michael, just to finish off, because I mean, I could ask you tons of questions, but one thing that I'm curious about, when you were the ambassador and you were in Washington and there was a lot of crisis, like you mentioned, Barack Obama was president, and like you said, he was a very, I'll say a difficult president for Israel to handle. We could, I think, put that out there I think it's true. So when, for example, there was something and they called you in and they wanted to admonish you, how does that work? Could you maybe just for explain to our viewers?
I was once, if you remember, there was the Biden incident where he was visiting here as the vice president, and somebody in the Israeli government at some level announced that in 7 years they're going to build a neighborhood in Ramat Shlomo.
In Jerusalem.
In Jerusalem, and beyond, quote unquote, the 67 lines. And that was, it was received as a crisis, a slap to the president, because we said, the president said not a brick on a brick. And we worked it out with Biden. We smoothed it over. It wasn't easy. And Biden got on a plane and hugged everybody and said goodbye. But I got on a plane and went back to Washington. By the time I got there, I heard that we were in the midst of a huge crisis and that I was being summoned to be dressed down at the State Department.
Uh-huh.
So I summoned my immediate staff. Remember, I just landed, I hadn't slept. And I said, I'm not going to take it. All right. When they come and dress me down, I'm going to dress them down. And I'm going to say that this is an artificial crisis that you generated for political purposes. There was no crisis with the vice president. You've made this up and you should be ashamed of yourselves. And this is going to hurt your security and our security. And and then they said to me, the Undersecretary of State said, do you want that written into the record? I said, absolutely.
And what was the response to that from the administration?
I think it just was. I want it in the record, though. Someday someone will write a book about it, and there will be.
Maybe it'll be you.
No, I don't think someone younger than me. Anyway, this has been fascinating, Ariel. Thank you very much.
Ambassador Oren, Dr. Michael Oren, it was a pleasure talking to you. We could talk to you for so much longer, just the stories you have and the insight you give. So thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Great pleasure and honor. Be well. Take care.
Thank you, Dr. Oren.
All right.